Welcome to CG's resumed annual conference, which has been distributed across your calendar in 5 segments. And today we have 2 half-hour paper sessions. Each session will consist of a presentation followed by a period of Q&A. So be prepared to ask your questions quickly because the presentations will only run for about 15 minutes and then there'll be about 15 minutes of Q&A. It's really good to see everyone back again and to again celebrate the fact that we have this opportunity to meet on the webinars twice a week and sometimes more often, as we'll have a 3rd webinar next week. It's a strange time in many respects. We have the UK Minister for Higher Education coming out late last week and saying that she thought that too many people were going to university. So you've got a Minister for Higher University telling people not to go to university. And I suppose, though, if we spent our webinar time talking about the strange things that ministers say, we'd probably not get enough time for anything else. So I better proceed quickly into the webinar itself. Just to run you through the web protocols. I'm just trying to bring up my PowerPoint, which I had on screen a minute ago. There it is. Yeah, it should be there. Okay. Remember, this webinar is being recorded as usual and will be posted online on the CGHE website in due course. A transcript of the chat function will also be posted, and that often makes interesting reading. Please keep yourself muted unless you have been asked to speak or ask a question. There's no need to have your video on during the webinar, but please do turn it on when asking a question. It makes it more interesting for everyone to see you. We recommend using the speaker view so that you can more clearly see who is talking. You can ask questions during the webinar or at the end of the presentation. What we normally do now is we select our questions from what comes up in the chat. So while you can use the raised hand button if you wish, the best way to get your question into the webinar is to write it down and put it in the chat so we can, and do that fairly early because questions that come up late in the Q&A tend to miss out. Now, when you're asked to ask your question in the webinar, please unmute yourself, most important, switch on your video and state your name and where you are from, and then ask your question. So at this point, it's a delight to hand over to our first speaker and our first project. And the first project on our program of graduate and graduateness is Paul Ashwin's project on rethinking graduateness, how student relations to knowledge change over the course of their chemistry and chemical engineering degrees. Paul is well known to many of you, I'm sure. He's the Deputy Director of the Centre for Global Higher Education, but more importantly, he's Head of Department at Lancaster, and he's one of the UK's foremost specialists on teaching and learning in higher education. He's also one of the editors of the journal Higher Education. It's a pleasure to hand over to Paul.
Thanks, Simon. I've just had one of those messages telling me my network bandwidth is low, so apologies if there are some technical issues as I talk through this presentation. So I'll just share my screen. Okay, so this paper comes from a joint project that involves researchers from the UK, South Africa and the United States. It's a particular subset of the research team who've been working on the work that's gone into this paper, myself, Margaret Maggs Blackie from Stellenbosch University, Nicole Peterson from Virginia Tech, and Rene Schmidt from the University of Cape Town. But it's part of a bigger project, and I'll talk through that and and how this paper relates to the wider project as I work my way through this talk. So there we go. So in terms of the argument I'm making, it relates partly to what Simon said about the comments of the university's minister in relation to low-value courses, which is, the focus on low-value courses is about courses, low value is defined as graduate salaries that students receive. So the value of a graduate being the money they earn. And that's an example of the kind of oversimplified accounts we have of what students gain from studying at university. And really the argument that underpins this presentation is the sense that if we focus on those simplified arguments, we lose a richer sense of the ways in which students benefit from studying at university, the ways in which they're transformed from their engagement with university life and through the knowledge they come into contact with at university. And also, we're kind of presenting arguments as people located in higher education. We're presenting arguments about the value of higher education in terms that higher education was never designed to meet. University degrees are not designed in order to get students the highest salary possible. So if we use those arguments as ways of justifying higher education, my argument would be that we get ourselves into a bit of a tangle and a bit of a mess. So, the current dominant ways, and I think there's probably a very UK flavour to what I'm going to say here, but the current dominant ways, certainly in the UK, of talking about graduateness are of two kinds. So the first kind is this kind of generic graduate attributes. Lots of universities across the world have lists of graduate attributes they claim that people who study at their institutions gain. The evidence base for these claims tend to be quite weak. And there's kind of two big problems for me about the focus on generic graduate attributes. The first is those graduate attributes are not meaningfully generic. So if we take the example of, say, problem solving, which is often appears in those lists of graduate attributes, whilst we can think about problem solving in generic terms, once we get into the detail of a particular discipline or area of study, it ceases to be generic. So the problem solving of a philosopher is nothing like the problem solving of a biologist or an engineer. So the idea that that's the same thing that we can call problem solving only works when you're at a very high level. The other problem with focusing on generic attributes is that most of the evidence suggests that universities aren't terribly good at developing these kind of generic attributes. So if you look at Academically Adrift, the book by Aaron Roxer that caused the storm in the US about the lack of benefit going to higher education, those measures were based on the generic skills that students developed. And there's quite a lot of evidence that universities aren't particularly good at developing generic graduate attributes. If you're claiming that's what university does, then that's a problem. My argument would be that's not what universities are trying to do, and therefore I would see it as less of a problem. So therefore, for me, graduate attributes aren't a helpful way of thinking about graduateness. Then we have the one related to low value courses, graduate salaries. And there's a number of problems with graduate salaries. The situation with COVID-19 is a wonderful example about how little impact higher education can sometimes have on the graduate salaries that students earn. Students graduating this year, the average salary is likely to be far lower than in previous years. According to the logic of graduate salaries, that means we've had a collapse in the quality of higher education. We know that's not true. What we've had is something like COVID-19 that's massively affected employment prospects. So, the first point is that why would you have a measure of graduateness that actually isn't directly in the power of universities to impact on? Secondly, we know that graduate salaries are structured by gender, ethnicity, disability, geography. What you earn is structured by all of these factors. And there are numerous studies that shows the way in which what students earn are related to factors that have nothing to do with their education, but to do with their personal histories and trajectories. Then the other thing that often relates to graduate salaries is the notion of a graduate premium, the idea of how much more does a graduate earn than a non-graduate. And whilst within a single country that kind of makes sense as a measure, the second you move internationally, then what you see is that graduate premiums are a measure of inequality. The highest graduate premiums in the world are in the most unequal societies. And again, I would question, why would we want to base our arguments for the claims about the benefits of higher education on contributing to inequalities across society? I'd far rather live in a more equal society with lower graduate premiums than a less equal society with higher graduate premiums. So for me, those two different ways of thinking about graduateness don't get to what universities are trying to achieve, don't get to the transformative power of a university education. And I would see that more in terms of the ways in which degree programs set up relations between students, knowledge, and the world. The ways in which engaging with knowledge allows students to see themselves differently, enables them to engage with the world differently, and actually make a contribution to society through that knowledge, through their relations to that knowledge. And I'd be wanting notions of graduateness to in some way capture what work the knowledge is doing and what work students' relations to that knowledge is doing through the course of their undergraduate degree. So that for me would be something that we'd be looking towards. And clearly that would be something that would be far more related to the particular degree you're studying than something that's generic, like a salary or a generic. What does the project talking about relate to those kinds of issues? So this is a longitudinal study of students studying chemistry degrees and studying chemical engineering degrees, and we're tracking particular students through the 3 or 4 years of their undergraduate degrees. We're looking at 12 departments, 2 in the UK, 2 in South Africa, we're looking at 12 departments, 4 in the UK, 4 in South Africa, and 4 in the US. My maths as a generic skill completely went off there. So it's 2 universities with 2 departments in each, which is how we get to the 12. And in the first year of the degrees, we interviewed a large number of students, and from that we selected around 10 case study students in each degree, and we've interviewed them in each subsequent year about their experiences studying, how they understand knowledge, how they understand society, and we've done that over, this is now the 4th year of the study. In addition to that, we've also done video recordings of particular teaching sessions and then done interviews with teachers in relation to that video, asking them what they were trying to achieve in their teaching. We've analysed curriculum documents, we've taken in student assignments that we've had a look at, and we've looked at institutional, national and disciplinary policy documents to try and get a grounded sense of how the student experience relates to the kind of pedagogic and educational environments in which they're situated. So I've kind of said a lot about we, I should now say who we are. So this is an international research team. The UK team based at Lancaster involves me, Jiang MacArthur, Janja Komjenovic, Kaylee Roswell and Dee Dalgleish. The South African team who are located at the University of Cape Town and Stellenbosch University are Renee Schmidt, Margaret Blackie and Ashish Agarwal. And then there's a US team based on Virginia Tech that involves Jenny Case, Nicole Peterson, Alaa Abdullah and Benjamin Goldschneider. So that's how we're working as a team across those sites. And then the way in which we're working in relation to our analysis is we're taking different aspects. And these teams are deliberately made up of people from different contexts, and also people are deliberately in more than one team. So there's one group who are looking at student agency across the experiences of their degree and looking at how students feel able to take control of their educational situation. There's another team looking at student identity, particularly in the idea of students' personal projects, what they're trying to achieve in their degrees, what they're trying to get out of that, and how that relates to different aspects of their educational experience. There's a further team looking at how students relate to society, how they see the knowledge they're engaging within their degree relating to what they can do in society. And then there's a team that's the focus of this paper, looking at how students relate to knowledge. And I'm just going to say a little bit more about what we've been doing in that group, although what I can say is clearly quite limited. So when I'm talking about students' relations to knowledge, this relates to a body of research that's largely been based on phenomenographic analysis that's looked in a number of disciplines that you've got there at the ways in which students' understanding of those different subject areas changes as they study more. So if we take the example of accountancy at the top, there's a sense of students moving through their degree from seeing accountancy as about routine work, then what I've called a watershed account. The idea is watershed is that this is what we want, minimum we'd want students to understand through doing their degree. And then in accountancy, that's about meaningful work. And then the most inclusive account that includes all the others is seeing accountancy as moral work. And so our argument would be that this gives us another way of thinking about graduateness. This gives us a way of thinking about the ways in which students coming into contact with knowledge changes their understanding of what this discipline can do and changes their understanding of what this discipline allows them to do in the world. And it's really important that if you look at those most inclusive accounts, there's an increasing focus on what that knowledge does in the world. Across these different subject areas, there's a sense of how, first of all, something that starts in the least inclusive account of being the kind of obvious aspects of the discipline, to something that's about a structured body of knowledge in the watershed account, and then in the third account, to something that actually takes that structured body of knowledge and thinks about how it relates to our responsibilities in the world. And that, for me, would be my argument about how, and our argument as a team, about how we might think about graduateness. So in relation to what we've done so far in chemistry and chemical engineering is we've had a look at the kinds of structures of knowledge that students' accounts seem to give us when they talk about what it means to do chemistry for chemistry students, or what it means to do chemical engineering for chemical engineering students. And we kind of find a kind of similar sort of structure. So for chemistry, the least inclusive account is about doing chemistry, almost a kind of definition that is simply something that restates itself. So what chemistry is doing chemistry. And then in other students, this shifts to understanding key things about chemistry being about the interactions between molecules. And this again is something that we'd say is key about university study and what we'd want all students to have, having done a degree. And then the most inclusive account focuses on interactions between chemistry and the world. And then in chemical engineering, first of all, the kind of least inclusive accounts really focus on solving problems. Engineering is about solving problems. Chemical engineering is about using chemistry to solve engineering problems, those kinds of accounts. Then in the watershed account, there's a sense of solving problems within an open system and the kind of challenges that brings out. And then in the most inclusive account, a sense of optimizing solutions to societal problems. So something that recognizes that whenever you're solving a problem, there's things to be balanced and you have to make choices and decisions about which things you choose to focus on in order to develop an optimal solution. So as a group, we've kind of developed those ways of understanding students' accounts of that knowledge through analysing the interviews that we've got so far. And hopefully that gives you enough of a sense of the ways we're thinking about this to kind of see how that might relate to a sense of graduate outcomes. So that's the overview. And what we're doing now in our work is we're beginning to look across all the 4 years of interviews and tracking how students develop through the course of their undergraduate degree. So how do they see chemistry in their first year? How do they see chemistry in their third and fourth year? And importantly, how does that relate to the design of their degree programs? Looking at the degree programs we've got, are there different aspects of the design that seem to help develop different ways of understanding these disciplines? And then with the follow-on funding that CGHE has received recently, the transition funding, that allows us now to track the same students into their first few years of employment and to really think about how these ways of understanding chemistry and chemical engineering come to play as they graduate from universities. And where I'd finish is to say that what we're trying to think about here are knowledge-specific graduate attributes. You know, the argument we're making isn't against graduate attributes, it's against generic graduate attributes. And is there a way of thinking about graduate attributes that takes the knowledge domain into account and thinks about how students contribute to their wider societies? I'd finish with a challenge that we're really struggling with in that is that still remains very individualistic and very much focused on the individual graduate. And where we'd want to get to in the end is something that situates graduates more in society and thinks about how they work with other societies in order to bring benefits to everyone. And that's something we'll be working on in the future. So to avoid taking up all the time, I shall leave it there and look forward to some questions.
Well, very well received, Paul. The communication issues only came up very momentarily. Like there were 3 or 4 times when we lost a couple of words, but you know, that was all. So that was pretty good considering. Yeah, thanks for that great succinct presentation, which critical and which opens up many issues. I'm going to ask you a question, and then we've got Johnny Rich as the first person on the call list. But my question is really about the cross case study aspects of the research. I mean, what's emerging in the comparison between the sites in the UK, US, South Africa? Are these other disciplines understood differently? Are they learned and taught differently? Are we getting different kinds of student formation effects from country to country?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I mean, there are kind of structural differences that come to the fore. So the first year in the US and South Africa is well, I should say it the other way. The first year in the UK is equivalent to the second year in the US and South Africa. So that's something that we're having to think about in terms of the differences between degree structures. So far, I think the main differences we found are more rooted at the differences within different degree programs, but they're not all defined by the country in which they're situated. So clearly institutions can do chemistry and chemical engineering differently, but that doesn't seem to be based on the countries in which they're located. And I think, you know, one of the things that shine through in all of the degree programs we're looking at is the quality of what those degree programs are offering. And in a way, that's not surprising, because if programs are going to agree to be in a study like this, they tend to be quite confident about the education they're offering to students. So that's always a limitation of this kind of research.
Thanks, Paul. I've got a question from Johnny Rich, and I think Johnny doesn't have video and he'd prefer if I ask the question. So I'm going to slowly ask the question. How does graduateness differ from graduate employability? Or are they just different aspects of the same set of properties? I mean, is there some component of graduateness that is not about employability? Does inclusiveness not make someone more employable? If there is some separate component, should we perhaps adopt a broader definition of employability? So I think Johnny's pointing you towards the opportunity to reconstruct the concept of employability.
Yeah, I mean, you could do that. You could take an employability lens on university outcomes. I just feel that's a mistake. You know, what for me, universities at that university degree programs at their best are designed to do are to bring students into a transformative relationship to knowledge that changes their sense of who they are, changes what they can do in the world and how they understand the world. And that clearly has impacts on their employability, but it also has impacts on their wider lives. It also has impact on wider society. And for me, moving to a kind of utilitarian approach in which the value of a university degree is only in terms of employability really limits the potential of higher education. And also, I think, kind of undersells other forms of education, understands further education. You know, there's other forms of further and professional education that also contribute to employability. That's not unique to higher education. And sometimes I think higher education overplays what it can deliver. But what higher education does that's special is this real focus on bringing people in relation to structured bodies of knowledge that can transform their experience. And for me, I'd want arguments for the value of university education to be based on that. You know, I think where Johnny and I might be differing is in terms of tactics rather than a fundamental difference. But I think having an argument for there's something valuable about a university education that is not related to employment is incredibly important in the current context.
Thanks very much, Paul. Questions are now pouring in, as tends to happen with the, late in the process of the Q&A. Katja Kromer-Nielsen, can you come in, please?
Yes, thank you. Hi, I'm Katja. I'm from the University of Copenhagen, and I've been studying chemistry students as well. And one thing that I found that I'm really interested to hear if you have experienced as well was that some students' perception of what chemistry was differed from what they were presented with from the study program. And that was really hard for the students that I encountered. And yeah, of course, a lot of trouble for them and in the way that they imagined themselves within the program and in the future with the program. So I'm really interested to hear if
no, we had similar things, and you kind of we sometimes have students who talk about chemistry in exactly that way that is more strongly related to the TV series Breaking Bad than it is to the academic study of chemistry. And I think, in the previous study that I was involved in, we looked at sociology and in a similar way and how students' understanding of sociology changed. And you get a similar thing of for some students, that study, that shift to understand the academic study of a subject is something different from they thought, is something that they really struggle with. And for me, the question that raises is about educational design. And how do we design a degree program that brings those students into conversation with the discipline, that says, actually, okay, you thought it was this, but actually, if you can see it in this way, this is what it can do for you. And part of our educational responsibilities as universities is to be able to have that conversation with students and say, look, this is what this knowledge can do for you. This is what it's powerful. This is what it can allow you to do in the world. And I think part of our responsibility that we need to take more seriously and do more on is that latter part of thinking, well, what does this knowledge allow students to do beyond their degree? Yes, Johnny, employability, but also beyond employability. What will this knowledge enable you to do in your life? And if we don't know that, then why are we asking students to study with us? So I've kind of used your question as a platform to say something else, but yeah, we've had similar things for students where that sense of the academic study of chemistry is not what they thought they were signing up for.
Thanks, Paul. Next question is from Fran. Fran, are you there? And I can read out from this.
Yes. Can you hear me, Simon? Yeah.
Yes, excellent.
Yeah, fellow Paul, thank you so much for very interesting project and presentation. I totally agree with you about the difference between employment and employability. And I have very a simple and very light question. Can you please give some examples or evidence, about the difference between attributes for individuals and attributes for society? I think the idea is very interesting, but I couldn't get the idea yet.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I think you couldn't get the idea yet because it's something that we're struggling with rather than something that we have an answer for. So I think, the way I think about it is that often the way we talk about how higher education benefits society is that we set up constant relations between higher education and things outside higher education. And what I'm more interested in is how can we develop ways of understanding that integrates graduates with non-graduates, that takes as a unit of analysis something that includes people who've benefited from higher education and people who've not been in higher education, and thinks about how collectively they achieve things together. So it's kind of not always seeing the thing that we're trying to relate to as higher education, but taking wider units of analysis that include higher education, but also include further education and employers, and tries to think more creatively about what they achieve as a whole, and then position higher education within that. I'm not sure that's particularly clearer, but if you or other people have other thoughts, I just think it gives us a different unit of analysis rather than always relating something to higher education.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, it's a great topic, isn't it? And it's worth a webinar on its own. I mean, that discussion, I think. A final question for Paul is from Helena Habter Azrez, and she's asked me to ask the question on her behalf. What she wants to know about, Paul, is your take on social mobility. What's the impact of higher education on social mobility?
Well, yeah, so I would say that part of this way of thinking would relate directly to Helena's question, which is that what we focused on here is students' relations to knowledge, and the earlier question from Katya that we had was about the ways in which students come in relation to that knowledge. And for me, where this relates to social mobility is the educational responsibilities of universities that design courses for all students, rather than just their ideal notion of students, or particularly socially privileged students, but says to all students, look, this is the journey we're going to take you on. This is our understanding of where you're currently located, and we're going to design a curriculum that helps you to develop an understanding of what this knowledge can do for you. And that, for me, is an issue of curriculum, and it's an issue of moving away from the current ways in which a lot of higher education mistakes social privilege for ability in students. So we get very focused on a one chance when you're 18 or a young adult, and if you can't do it then you've got no potential, rather than thinking about the ways in which all people can benefit from the knowledge that higher education has to offer through careful curriculum design that opens up that knowledge to as many people as possible.
I want to thank you, Paul, very much for your brief but really compelling and instructive opening up of the project for everyone. We have great hopes of the project. There's a lot of data have been collected. It's been systematically handled in all 3 countries over a period of 4 years. And we have the opportunity in the Transition Centre of CG to complete a very, very full and thorough program of work. We think that this project that Paul and colleagues are involved in will take forward the sociology of higher education and knowledge in a significant way. Will create permanent benefits for knowledge in the field. And we would expect that the project team will be back with us at a future time when they're closer to their final findings. I now will pass to our second paper for today from Kaho Mok and Jiang, and they're going to look at the topic Academic Productivity Matters, International Learning and Job Acquisition of Chinese PhD returnees. So these, I understand, Kaho, are students who've gone to outside China for their doctorate and they've come back to China, and what happens to their careers at that point, which you'll explain further for us. Kaho Mok is very well known to many of you, a major leader of our field in higher education studies worldwide and particularly in East Asia. He's Vice President of Lingnan University, which is a distinguished liberal arts university in Hong Kong. And he has many other roles and hats. He's a very extensively published scholar, I might say, and someone for whom we look to leadership in many respects in scholarly and institution building projects in the region and worldwide. And Kaho, of course, has already been part of our webinar program this semester. He's going to be joined by Jiang. Jiang is a very accomplished scholar. I was going to say emerging scholar, but I think Jin has already emerged. She's producing pretty important papers, and we've been fortunate to have her as one of our postdoctoral researchers in the CG program that Kaho leads in Lingnan in Hong Kong. So without further delay, Kaho, it's over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Simon. And I entirely agree with Paul's presentation with a strong argument that higher education is not only for graduate employment and also helping students to get into the labor market. But at the same time, we have to be mindful that parents, particularly in Asia, they are concerned about their investment in higher education, particularly in PhD programs, and in what way the international learning would contribute to the job acquisition. So this is a piece of work, is a part of a larger research project funded by CGHE. As my team at Lingnan University in Hong Kong are very interested to know about the returnees, particularly students from Asia graduating from UK institutions. When they go back home, what's then their job acquisition? And in the last couple of years, we focus on master and also undergraduate students. And this piece of work is our collaboration with Peking University by making use of a data set available to look into the Chinese PhD student having learning experience elsewhere. And when they return home, what's then the job acquisition experience? So next page. The growing pressure of globalization and definitely intensify competition for global talent. I think China cannot immune from this part of influence. So we are interested to know about what factors PhD returnees, international learning experience could contribute their employment in a top university. Especially we are focusing on those students coming from China, their PhD student on government-funded scholarship. So next page. And China, just like other society, I think is quite famous in terms of a world factory, but depending on manufacturing, the Chinese government well realized that only dependent on manufacturing cannot sustain its economy. So in the last 20 years, and the Chinese government has been trying very hard to expand the higher education, and also with concentrated resources by grooming talents in the PhD program, especially when the Chinese government is very keen to turn the country into more knowledge-based economy and promoting innovation-centric entrepreneurship. So the policy like Make in China 2025 strategies was rolled out in order to help the country to transform into the industrial superpower by 2049. It certainly requires a strong labor force which has appropriate knowledge, adaptive skills, and relevant experiences. And dependent on the local universities, it may take some time for grooming and nurturing talents group of this kind. So that's why Chinese government has been using a lot of resources and scholarship by sending out the students, PhD students, to study overseas. Next page. And we are focusing on a group of students, about 400 students. They are the recipient of the China Scholarship Council program. And we look into how they experience about their job search after returning from overseas study. And next page gives you the idea about how many overseas PhD. And next page, and return PhD grad January in the international literature would believe that they have a better outcome in job acquisition in academia. First of all, they have low serious difficulties in job seeking. They are more optimistic about the future career development because of having overseas learning and degree, having an advantage in the academic labor market, and some review even suggest they enjoy a high status than their peers and better academic and innovative performance. However, more students, graduating from overseas learning, would these sort of, phenomenon be sustained? The challenge would be for PhD, Chinese PhD returnees to secure a satisfactory position, it becoming a question, especially when more and more returnees coming back home. So our research gap being identified as a little is known about the recent PhD returnees' learning experience and their job acquisition. The question to be more specific for our research is to what extent the overseas learning experience could really enable them for the job, acquisition and career development, especially looking in this group of scholarship holder. So next page is about the research gap. Because of time, basically we want to look into how far, what are the major factors contributing to the job acquisition of those PhD returnees in China. Now my colleague Jiang will present to you our theoretical framework and also major findings. Jiang, is your turn.
Okay, thank you, Professor Mok. I need to turn to the next page, but it seems it doesn't work. Oh, okay. This is Jiang. We'll talk about the literature review and also the research findings. And then I will hand over to Professor Mok to talk about the implication of our research findings. And this figure presents the theoretical framework of our work. And we focus on several key factors of international learning experience, namely transnational human capital, institutional prestige, and pre-employment productivity, and how these key factors affect the academic job acquisition. In addition, we focus on the experience before overseas study. That is the inbreeding or network effect before overseas study. And we think this is very important in job acquisition in mainland China. And I will talk about this briefly one by one. The first factor of internal learning experience is about transnational human capital. Some earlier studies suggest that the overseas students' experience, in particular of doctoral studies, will accumulate their knowledge ability so that they could have a better advantage in job acquisition in academia. And the second factor is about institutional prestige. Some research that there is a strong positive correlation between the prestige of the university, of the study, and the prestige of the university where they work. And in fact, this involves two effects. The first effect is about selection. It means the elite individuals are selected to prestigious universities, prestigious PhD programs. So this institutional prestige just reflects their cumulative advantage. And the second effect of the institutional prestige is about the institutional effect. It means the positive impact of the institution of the PhD program, of the PhD study of the university, such as the faculty members of very good quality, positive peer effect, or better motivation of their PhD study in the prestigious university. And this prestigious effect will lead to better publication or better academic achievement that enable the PhD graduates to have better job acquisition in academia. In this case, the institutional effect will be mediated by the academic productivity or the academic achievement in predicting their job acquisition in academia. And the institutional effect also includes a pure prestige effect. It means this is pure, independently of the pre-employment productivity. And recall this is affiliated honor or pure prestige, because some hiring university or department would anticipate to have a PhD graduate of a very prestigious university will have a positive implication for the hiring university's own prestige. So this is about pure affiliated honor, pure prestige. And the third factor about the international learning experience is about pre-employment academic productivity. In fact, there are mixed evidence on the effect of academic productivity on job acquisition. Some studies suggest the effect is insignificant, while some studies suggest that there is a significant effect of the academic productivity in the access to permanent jobs or tenure-track academic jobs. And we also summarize some key factors before the international learning experience or before the study overseas. But this is also important in job acquisition in mainland China. It is about inbreeding or social relations. Some studies suggest that the social types are very important in selecting candidates in academic university or departments. And however, the overseas doctoral degree holders are usually disadvantaged in domestic scholarly network because they study overseas. Some studies suggest that if these overseas doctoral degree holders could maintain their domestic scholarly networks, which would give them advantage in job acquisition. So in order to test these factors or to examine how these factors of international learning experience affect job acquisition of the PhD returnees, we use the national survey on the
Connection has some problem.
We've lost Jiang. Kaho, can you take over? Is she back? Jiang, are you okay? We've lost you. I see we've lost quite a few words, I would think. Well, this hasn't happened before in our program, so here's the first time. Kaho, we fortunately have you with us.
Okay,
perhaps you can supplement.
Yes.
Hello, Jiang, can you hear me? No, I think Kaho will have to use you.
Okay, no problem. So I think we draw on the national survey on the government-funded program and also making use of the Scopal data. And because of observing time, we just present to you the major finding of this piece of study. Basically, we found that the important thing is not only about the affiliation with the university or the graduating university. More importantly, we found that there's no significant pure prestige effects of returnees' doctoral university, independent of their individual merits. More important is about productivity. The reason is simple, because China has so many students sending out to overseas learning, and the pre-employment academic productivity does matter. It determines about the job acquisition and career development in China. And many students coming back to China, they are fighting and struggling to get job. What differentiates them is not necessarily about the degree they get nowadays in China, and the productivity does matter. And some people may argue, 关系 or social relationship does matter. But the returnees may be disadvantaged, as Jiang just mentioned, because they are not well connected to the domestic institution. The 关系 does not play up. But now, when Chinese universities are very keen about ranking, I hate to say that, one of the major criteria for assessing individual performance is about the productivity and what sort of articles or journal publications that individual would have, and it becomes the basis for differentiating returnees from overseas studies. So the pre-employment academic productivity plays a very important role in determining the PhD returnees' job placement in China. And the larger number of publications compared to those people, they do not have sufficient publication would have a determining factor about the job acquisition and career development. So our finding also suggests academic productivity has a positive impact and a predictive measure on the likelihood that PhD graduates return to their home universities. And next page. So come to the discussion part. I think this piece of research is interesting to show that people now, they enjoy a lot of overseas learning experience, but it is only a prerequisite in a way. Am I right, Jiang? You found a basis only. But now what really differentiates them is about the postgraduate performance in terms of the production of publications. For those people, they are fortunate enough they can go overseas with the Chinese scholarship. They can enjoy overseas learning. They build their network and also generate the experience for getting good publication. It found the foundation for them to get job in China. But the problem to us is there's a widening gap between the have and have lost in China. You just imagine what we presented to you today are those scholarship holders from Chinese government. For those students, first of all, many of them, they do not have the experience to go overseas. And although they are not recipients of the scholarship from Chinese government, may have a kind of, disadvantaged position when having, when they are entering the academia. And higher education is now confronting a national and global disequilibrium, as Simon mentioned in your recent article. And we have to handle both the local and global tension carefully, especially when the world trade situation is not very good and China has to find a way to sustain its economy. And how far the Chinese government can finance more and more people to go outside. And we also ask a question in the future whether we have sufficient, places or positions in Chinese university, especially when more and more returnees coming back to China. About 10 years ago or 20 years ago, overseas learning or having the overseas learning experience as a returnee is easier to get job. But now I think it's hugely competitive in China. So we want to ground up by sharing with you this piece of research because this fills the gap that many of the similar research focus on undergraduate and master students. So this piece is about PhD students. And talking about the broader project, in the last couple of years, when we are conducting this research, we also published some stuff in 2020 and 2018 by reflecting upon how the Asian students graduating from UK universities, when they go back home, their learning experience has affected their job acquisition and career development. And most recently, and this presentation has been published by Higher Education Policy this year. So we welcome comments and also questions. And Jean and I would more than happy to take on your comments and questions. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Kaho, and thank you, Jin. And apologies to everyone for the lost connection, but it's great when you have two presenters in those situations, isn't it? I've got a question. We've got a couple of interesting people on the call list. I've got a question first. Actually, I've got two questions. One is a practical question, and the other one's a sort of theory question. It's funny, isn't it? When we talk about employment, we critical scholars, we all want to push the envelope out and do what Paul did and talk about higher education in a more general way and in a more, perhaps a more agency-focused way about what it does in its formative sense for individuals and society. But we find ourselves much of the time as higher education scholars doing practical things and providing practical information. And, when you talk about PhD returnees, you're talking about something very practical. I mean, will people have careers as a result of going overseas? That's a very important question for individuals who are in that situation. So I'm going to ask you a practical question about that. And this is something that exercises every doctoral student in the second half of their study. What kind of advantage do you get from publishing journal articles before you complete or at least submitting journal articles before you complete your thesis? I mean, how much does that pre-employment productivity, which you discussed in the presentation, really matter?
So according to our statistics analysis, if I'm wrong, Jean can correct me, but the more publication that they generate from the WIFA would have enabled them to have a better chance to get at least interview and shortlist for interview. But the more productivity they get, they can be more guaranteed in terms of job acquisition in China.
Well, it's a pretty straightforward answer, isn't it? So it's just, we've all just got to work harder. That's how it is. My theoretical question is about guanxi and social capital. And I've read a number of studies recently, doctoral studies and also articles where some scholars from China working in the West doing their doctoral studies have been caught up by Bourdieu and have used social capital notion, which of course is quite useful in some respects, but not designed for China. and other people want to make Guanxi work as a concept, as an analytical concept. How do you see that? I mean, that theoretical question.
So I'm glad to share with you my PhD student just had a wife yesterday. Basically, her study is about how Guanxi be conceptualized in China, especially when she looked into explore those young entrepreneurs returning from overseas, and then their job acquisition and startup experience in China. Well, everyone talks about Guanxi according to her study, but Guanxi is a kind of, reformed social relationship in China. But Guanxi is no longer the old way of thinking, only talking about exchange. According to her study, Guanxi also contributes to the network and also making social and public goods to the society, not necessarily only reducing to only individual benefits. Mm-hmm. And according to her study, I think this is very interesting and fascinating. We have to reconceptualize Guanxi not only by looking to produce a concept, but also contextualize in China, particularly the professional network would become something very important. She called it an old boy cut from Tengxin company, the technical Guanxi being established within the professional network.
That's very interesting, Kaha. And I think it's a topic we could well explore further in future. We've got a number of people on the call list. I've got Jiang Kao, I'm going to bring in first, and Lingnan, well, I'll bring in second. So Jiang, can you come in, please?
Oh, thank you very much. This is a very interesting project. And I'm actually quite interested in how this kind of PhD experiences from abroad may influence their academic career compared with domestic PhDs, maybe not only in regard to social capital or the construction of network of Guanxi, but also other academic attributes, such as what kind of language they will use to publish their articles and what kind of theoretical or conceptual framework they will refer to, and also what kind of, will they be more willing to participate in international academic collaboration? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Jean, can you take the question?
Sorry, because of the weak connection, it's not clear to me about the question.
Okay, let me try this one. Okay, basically, I think this is an interesting question. Thank you very much for the question. And when we look into our data set, basically, we are looking into those publications and you search by scopus and also internationally indexed. So I think when we are talking about productivities, we refer to those publications recognized by international index, and they are valued by local universities in China. And this is quite core. If you treat it as a kind of international index or citation, I think it's very much that those returnee will have a better position when comparing to the locally graduated students.
Thanks very much, Kaha. And can we bring in Lingnan at this point? Lin, are you there?
Yes, thank you, Simon. Thank you. I would like to have a question. I think somehow it relates to both presentation. On one hand, I am, and sorry for not saying, I'm a PhD student from Monash University, and I think I agree with the conclusion that you have in the second presentation, that PhD student at the end of the candidature, we are worrying that whether we have a career or not, and we are quite employment oriented with that. But from the first presentation, we also have the aspiration of the university, that university should prepare students to go beyond employability and should help students to transform themselves. So my question is that how can we balance the tension between, on one hand, students' employment orientation and on the other hand, the university aspiration for transforming the student, and especially here, the PhD student. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. I certainly think that because of our piece of research focusing on job acquisition of the Chinese PhD returnees, but to me, I think have a deep reflection about what is the role of higher education. Higher education is not only producing workers for the labor market at all, especially PhD students, and for this group of talent, they could be a transformer of society. So when government invests in higher education, particularly grooming more high-level talents with PhD experience, government should not only look for the returns from making sure about productivity in terms of publication alone. And government or the society, the wider society, should also value those graduates they bring with very strong power in transforming society, because education has a very important role is to nurture citizens with global vision, citizens with silver-mindedness, and to promote the well-being of society. So sometimes this is very difficult to quantify, but in Asia, I hate to say that parents and individuals are very much concerned about the returns. They define the returns as job and also the salary and promotion. But other than that, we have to go beyond this particular aspect, not only talk about graduate less in terms of salaries or career alone. This is part of the whole discussion about graduate less. But at the same time, I think the public good function and also the well-being of society through the knowledge class would also be important, especially for China going through this development stage.
Thank you, Kaho. And you know, I just read a very interesting doctoral study recently about this question of values in China. And the conclusion was that for many parents, and this is based on the empirical work, for many parents as well as students, formation of a person in terms of good values, being a good person, being a good self-improving person throughout the lifetime, that was very important and in some ways more central than the instrumental questions of what kind of job the degree would lead to. But of course, that question is never forgotten either.
Yeah.
So it's always there. But it's not as if it's either or. I mean, in the West, I think the debate is often posed as instrumental versus high-mindedness. But in China, high-mindedness is not seen as so high. It's just normal. And the instrumental is not seen as in conflict with forming a person as a good person, and through that making a good contribution to society, because that's what a good person does. The two things seem to be a bit more closely aligned in China than they were in the West. So thanks, Lynn, for opening up such an important question and allowing us all to be more high-minded as a result. I've got time for one more question, and Soman Chattopadhyay from New Delhi in India, I think, is online. And Soman, can you come in?
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Simon, for giving me the opportunity. You know, my question is that, you know, to what extent your statistical results would depend on the discipline of the students of the PhD students. I mean, general versus professional education, or social sciences versus natural sciences.
Okay, thank you. I think in our, sorry. I think thank you for your question. I think we can look into the data and share with you more closely about how different disciplines would have a different impact on job acquisition.
Well, colleagues, I think we've reached the end of our, unless we've lost Kaho as well, I think. No, he's still there.
Yeah,
I think we've reached the end of the advertised time. There was some good questions coming through from Kundai and Paolo Iras. Kundai wanted to know about postdoc experience and how important that was, but you could perhaps take that up in the chat, one or both of you. Paolo Iras dropped the $64,000 question. How does what's happening in Hong Kong affect all of this? But I think that's the topic for another webinar. We have a date has opened up on the 28th of July, and because of what's happening in Hong Kong is important for many people around the world, I'm thinking perhaps we could have a discussion about Hong Kong's universities in the present context. But it's a very difficult topic, of course, to to get right in a short time. I might discuss that with you offline if we can, Kaho.
Okay.
And can I thank you, Kaho and Jin? You know, you're doing great research. It's really important and really interesting for many people, as you can tell by the chat. So do take the opportunity to engage with some of the questions that are coming through the chat before we turn off the chat at 3:30. So let me sincerely thank everyone for your participation. Thank again to Paul and his team, as well as Kaho and his team. We really benefit from these presentations. The high quality research that's going on needs to be got out there. So, and we'll see both of these teams again, I would think, before the work is completed. So,
okay, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you, Simon.
Pleasure. Next webinar is again with Paul, and Paul will be chairing this one. It's on Thursday, and it's called "The Pandemic and the Future of University Education." And our speakers include Jenny Case from Virginia Tech in the US, and Dr. Amanda Lengwa, who's at Rhodes University in South Africa. So that'll be an important webinar. So we do hope to see you in 2 days' time. Thanks very much to everyone, and bye for now.